Hey, since we're all together here, I think we can all give ourselves a little bit of a round of applause and celebration in acknowledgement of a tremendous award that was given to the Social Justice Advocacy Project.
Woo!
Yeah, some of you already know what we're talking about. We posted about it just yesterday. Assembly member Chris Holder has selected as 2020 California Nonprofit of the Year, Social Justice Advocacy Project, for all the work that's been going on. So round of applause, everybody. That is awesome. And we know Operation Ally is an outflow of the many good works that are being done through the Social Justice Advocacy Project, a tremendous effort that Thomas and Brittany have been spearheading for 5 years now. And I, along with many of you, have been super honored to join in the last, several months together. So Thomas, do you want to say anything about how cool your wife is for making sure the Social Justice Advocacy Project keeps moving forward?
I certainly would. First, I want to correct, it was Assemblyman Holden who gave us the honor. And obviously,
that's not what I said?
You said Holder.
Holder.
I think you might have confused him with Eric Holder. But either way, yeah, my wife, you guys don't get to see her a lot, because she does a lot of the background stuff. And I even realized that as I was putting together pictures for her campaign, I'm horrible at taking pictures. So it's easy for people to look at this thing and say, Thomas, you're doing a lot of good work, but there's a lot of effort that goes beyond this and beyond me. And in fact, I consider myself a small part of the operation. I think up the programs and, we work on executing them, but my wife is the lifeblood of the organization. So I do want to make sure that this is not being considered a Thomas Award, but a Brittany Award, a Jen Award, Rob Award, Gloria Award. We have a board that help us. We have volunteers that support us. Most people don't even know that we don't spend money. I have an effort where I like to try and work off of volunteers and community partners. And so it's all volunteer driven. So it is not an award that we take alone, but it's an award that truly belongs to the community. So I do want to make sure that that gets said. That being said, enough of that. Let's jump into what we're here to talk about, and that is anti-racism, right? Taking anti-racism beyond theory and the words on the paper, and let's actually talk about how we actually move into action. Now, I want just to kind of frame out what this discussion is. This isn't a scenario where Jason and I are telling you how to be anti-racist. We are unpacking the content of the text and giving some ideas and sharing ideas and reflection on our takeaways from the text. So this is meant to be a group exercise and a group reflection as we go through the material. What we've done, instead of going chapter by chapter in a summary, each chapter or the book seems to have major themes. And we're going to focus rather than on the chapter on those themes. So as you're going to notice, tonight we're talking about race, racism, and anti-racism. Well, it's not going to be presented as the chapters flow throughout the book. In fact, we're actually starting from chapter 3 and then kind of working around in the way that we are presenting this material. So the goal is not to be married so much to the text that we forget to apply it in our everyday lives, okay? And that's what we're doing here. You're largely gonna see a lot of the content that is stripped of some of the historical references and the anecdotes that Dr. Kendi uses in his text, and we've extrapolated out the principles and the philosophies that Dr. Kendi is wishing to convey through the text, at least from our perspective. So that is what this is. This is not a book study. This is not a book review. We are going off of the assumption that you've already kind of been through that. But in our discussions, we are laying a foundation so that if you did not read the book, then you can still engage in the discussion. You're just going to be missing out on a lot of the contextualization that Dr. Kendi uses to illustrate his points. Does that make sense? Any questions or anything before we get started? Jason, you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you did a good job summarizing it. There's nothing I want to add. You asked if there were any questions, so I'll give a beat or two to see if there are any questions from our members on Zoom or anybody who may be watching live on Facebook. The book was sold out for a couple of weeks immediately following all of the events surrounding George Floyd's death, and it became quite critically acclaimed. It already was. Dr. Kendi had previously had a New York Times bestseller, and this was, timing was almost perfect for the release of this book. But let's go ahead and just jump in, Thomas.
All right, so as it says, we're gonna start the conversation talking about race.
So that's where I will pick up. And was that the first slide? Oh, can you go? Thank you. So in America, we have such a problem with defining race. And I think there was a perfect example of that with the selection of Senator Kamala Harris to become the vice president nominee for the Democratic Party. And this isn't about partisanship, but this is a tremendous case study in how distorted the ideas around race and ethnicity are. And if we're going to talk about how to be an anti-racist, we need to know what race even is. And that's a really interesting question, because I've asked some very intelligent people, including some of whom are on this call, who were just talking before me, like, hey, how do you define race, ethnicity, and nationality? Like, I don't really want to deal with that. So I got the task. No, but I don't presume to be a expert on these definitions, but just take, for example, like I said, the uproar that came with Kamala Harris. Is she African American? Is she Black? Well, her dad was born in Jamaica. Her mom is Indian. And, you know, we have all of these different constructs around what makes somebody Black, or what makes somebody African American, or why are we even, isn't she really Jamaican American? And, you know, the way I define it, we'll look at the next couple of slides, or the way at least we'll talk around it. So race is defined as a category of humankind that shares certain distinctive physical traits. I think for most people, when they think race, I'm not saying this is the Webster's dictionary definition. I'm saying this is the talking definition of what people are thinking. I mean, even when we think in racial terms, we think Black, white, right? We think of physical characteristics, things that people can see. So I think at its most basic, understandable definition, race, we can say, is a humans who share certain distinctive physical characteristics. I think the next slide, we have Kendi and his definition, or some of his talks around race. No? No. That's okay. Let's go ahead and just go to the racism slide then, because that's probably where I'm thinking of. Thomas, can we go to the racism slide?
Sorry, I was trying to talk and I didn't know I was on mute.
Oh.
So race actually in and of itself, as it's described here, has no qualitative value nor quantitative value, right? We're literally just talking about categories of humankind. The question then becomes, how are you valuing those categories and those groups of humankind compared to each other? And that's why race actually matters. Otherwise, we're literally just talking about the recognition of differences, ethnicities, right? But race, because of historical qualitative and quantitative value that has been put on different races, has distinction. And that's why all of this matters. In we're not necessarily just talking about the value of being different, or maybe even, you know, not recognizing those differences. We're talking about what sort of power, what sort of resources, what sort of qualitative and quantitative values are being linked to those particular groups, and then how are we responding to those values? And that's where we kind of bridge the gap from race to racism. Okay, that ism is the action behind the categorization of humans.
Yeah, so racism, the denial is the heartbeat of racism, beating across ideologies, races, and nations. A quote from How to Be an Anti-Racist. We have utilized race to deny people's rights to their own humanity, to their own, truly their own body and self-worth. Racist isn't a descriptive term, it's a pejorative, equivalent to saying, I don't like you. So this is really interesting when we start to have conversations around race, racism, and racist. So to call somebody a racist in our culture today, this is what Kendi is saying, that we haven't used it properly as a descriptive. We've used it as a pejorative or an insult to say, well, you're a racist. And that is actually not a definition that we will keep through the unpacking of the ideas around Kendi's book, because racist truly is a descriptive of a point in time action. So that is to say that there are moments in time where people act as a racist, where you see me jogging down the street and you say, hey, we got to lock the doors. If you would not have had that same type of action or response to a white person jogging down the street, if it was a white woman jogging down the street, would you think, oh, we got to lock the doors? Or is there something about my physical appearance that causes you to have that gut reaction? That's a racist thought. That doesn't mean you're a racist as a person. Now, at some point in time, your continuous actions and thoughts develop into your character, but a single action, a single thought does not make you a racist. It means you had a racist thought. And it's important to make that distinction. It may seem like we're kind of having a semantic battle there that doesn't really amount to anything, but it truly does, because it allows all people to then self-evaluate and say, where have I been racist? You know, if I get cut off on the freeway, am I looking over at the driver of the car expecting them to be of a certain race? That's racism. If I'm looking over to the driver of the car and expecting them to be of a certain gender, that's being racist or sexist in that moment. That doesn't mean that you're always against that gender. It doesn't mean that you're always against that race, but in that moment, you made a racist action. Thomas, you want to add to that?
Well, no, I guess the next slide kind of clarifies a little bit more, right?
Sure.
You know, but a racist is a person who shows or feels discrimination or prejudice against people or other races, or who believes that a particular race is superior to another, right? And that there lies the heart of all of it. Okay, it is that comparison between races, and then the attribution of one race having more value than the other one is at the heart of what we're trying to undo, right? So the problem here isn't difference. The problem here is the differences that we make on difference, right? And so when we think about race and how we start to correlate and assess other groups are in relation to ourselves, are we doing that in a way that demeans that other group? Are we doing that in a way that demeans us? And if either of those are true, then that means you're being racist, right? That means you're actually given a hierarchy to these human characteristics and classifications when there should be no hierarchy whatsoever. We should all be considered equal, but different.
Right. And I will say this, two things. On the equal but different, there is value in differences. Okay. You look at the relationships you've been in. If you've been in a relationship with someone who is just like you, they probably got on your nerves, because everything bad about yourself, you're seeing in them. You're like, oh my gosh, I need to get away from this person. There's a reason why opposites attract, right? Because there's value in difference and bringing different voices to the table, to the relationship. So we're all equally valuable, and we all have a unique value because of our unique differences. The other thing I want to add to that, and Kendi does a really good job of lining this out from its historical truth, is we do have to acknowledge that the very existence of race, this social construct, was created to provide a hierarchy. If you have the book, you can reference, or you can do a little bit of research, and it goes back to when the Spanish colonizers were going into Africa, and they needed a way to define this group of people and put them at the lower end of the hierarchy so that they could justify the actions of taking them and enslaving them, beyond what we often hear about. Oh, well, all people have been enslaved at one time. Yeah, but in almost all cases, it was a temporal thing, not a lifetime and generational thing. So we do need to acknowledge that race, this social construct, only exists for a hierarchical benefit to those who were in power that put it there. However, having said that, as we'll see later in the presentation, simply going to the point of, well, since it was created out of a bad intention, we should just ignore it, stop talking about it. That won't work either, because it is interwoven into everything that we do in our culture at this point. So we have to address it. We can't ignore it.
And in fact, we're going to talk about this on the next slide, the difference between bad people and bad policy. Part of the ways that the system is able to perpetuate itself is to get us to blame each other for where we are, as opposed to blaming the system or policies. That is not to say that individuals aren't individually accountable or responsible for their behaviors and what happens in their lives, but a lot of the behaviors and a lot of the outcomes, social outcomes that we're seeing, are predicated on historical policies that have been codified through law over generations. And without recognizing how bad those policies are, then it's really easy for us to talk about bad people, right? And so Kendi talks about the fact that one either believes that problems are rooted in groups of people as a racist, or locates the roots of problems in power and policies as an anti-racist. One either allows racial inequities to persevere as a racist, or confronts racial inequities as an anti-racist. There is no in between. There is no safe space. There is no such thing as being not racist. Okay, so there are some Black people who have problems, who make bad decisions. Okay, just like there are some white people who make really bad decisions, right? There are some Latino people, there are women, there are men. We all make bad decisions. Okay, so when you get to the point of saying an entire group makes bad decisions, this is why they have the poor social outcomes that they do. That is racism, because no whole group is bad. okay? There are bad policies that treat an entire group a particular way, and therefore that group suffers disproportionately from social outcomes, or excuse me, social inequities, but that group is not bad. And if you've gotten to the point of you see a Black person and you've made up your mind that there's something about that Black person that you know simply because they are Black, then that means you are being racist, okay? We are all unique people, and I hear this quote all the time: the Black community is not a monolith. No group is a monolith. It just so happens the Black community is treated as a monolith. That way, when you see a Black person, when you see a big Black man, right, that Black man is presumed to be aggressive, right? Or sexually inclined, right? These are stereotypes that we have about people that the minute we see them, we start to attribute those values onto them, all right? That's racism, okay? So the Black community has situations, we have issues that disproportionately impact us. Black men, 6% of the population, yet 40% of those incarcerated, right? That is a disproportionate impact that impacts the Black community. That does not mean that Black men are all criminals or predisposed to criminality. It means there's probably some law somewhere that have crimes being unfairly defined, that have laws being unfairly executed, or there are social consequences and predicates that exist because of some sort of racist policy that sets an entire group up for failure. And this is, I mean, I know the clash here is, well, you sound like you're making excuses. Well, read your books, okay? Read history. When you actually look at racial restrictive covenants where it says Negroes cannot live here, cannot occupy this space, that is a group that is impacted by that particular policy. When you have an entire federal government saying we are not going to give any funding to any developers who are developing any housing where Black people are going to live, that is a bad policy that disproportionately impacts a group, and that policy has social outcomes. And what we do, we say, well, Black people are lazy because look at those social outcomes. We don't look at any of the policy predicates that actually led to those outcomes. And that's what this book is trying to get us to do, is kind of unpackage why we believe the way we do about particular groups and where they are in society. All right, so we talk about systemic racism. This goes beyond the individual beliefs, right? You can call me out my name all you want, and you can think about me whatever you want. There are poor Black people who think very poorly about other poor Black people, and there's no consequence to that, right? But there does become a consequence when those opinions make their ways into institutional and systemic thinking. And that's where the heart of the issue is here, is Black individuals, minorities, non-white individuals have been classified as lesser than because the white group has been considered the model, right? That means all other groups are aspiring to achieve whiteness, whatever whiteness is. Okay, and so that belief system has worked itself into the system in ways that define and modify the system's behavior as it pertains to that particular group. That is very different from interactional racism, the type of feeling that I would get, you know, from my racist neighbor or the shop clerk who follows me around when I go into 7-Eleven to buy a drink. Right? There's a difference in that, not only the feeling, but the consequence. And so a lot of what we're talking about here is not only that interactional, that individual racism, but also the systemic racism, that in order to really understand the social outcomes, you really have to understand how the system interacts with that particular group and how those outcomes are the result of that interaction.
And Thomas, let me add something to that, because I think it's important. It's always been a value of mine that simply having a predisposed thought about a group of people is not inherently racist, because there are some things that, for me, it becomes racist when it's negative, when you inherently believe negatively about a certain group of people. That is racist, because there are certain qualities that you can ascribe to groups of people that come from certain areas. That there are values of culture. There are certain things that are important, certain things that are not. But when you ascribe a value, when you have a negative outlook on someone having a different value system, that's when it becomes racist. Because I never want to give up the value of a person's culture and the value of the person's background, which are all, again, hard to extrapolate from the overall race term and concept and construct. So when we look at systemic racism, systemic racism goes beyond individual beliefs, feelings about about people and other races. It means that systems on which society functions, the economic system, the education system, the healthcare system, the criminal justice system, are infused with and impacted by the racism in which they were created. So racist people put systems in place, and we know this country was very fine with allowing for racism to perpetuate everything that it did for hundreds of years while it was being founded, while wealth was being created. Well, look, think of all of the systems that were created when literally Black people were not viewed as human beings. And so these systems were created without the mindset of any sort of equality across races. Education system, healthcare system, criminal justice system, all infused and impacted by the racism with which the people who created them worked. So it's important to understand that and establish that as you continue to have this conversation.
So where do we go, right? I know if you're like me and you're like, okay, fine, let's just stop talking about race then, okay? And that's what the notion of colorblindness is. And it's the notion that people simply see people for humans, and as individuals always treat people the same, right? We're looking for everybody to be the same, to look the same, and we want to ignore the differences, right? But there's some peril in that, because if we ignore the differences, we ignore everything that has happened up until then and where everybody is in regard to the way that the law has treated them respectively, right? So
hold on, Thomas.
rhetoric, what's up?
You're just going to skip over the rainbows and unicorns on that slide?
I don't even know why they were there. Quite honestly,
that's because I was supposed to talk
Brittany
about that slide. That's why.
Oh, okay. I was like, I don't know what Brittany was thinking when she put that in there. Okay.
I put the rainbows and unicorns on, sir.
Describe the rainbows and unicorns, man, because they need description.
Yeah, you were just going to ignore them. Everyone's like, what's happening here? So that's my my thought on when people say, oh, I'm just colorblind. Sure, and we live in a world of rainbows and unicorns. Like, that is a fantasy land to say I'm colorblind. I always treat everybody the same way. And, I don't even see, Jason, when I see you, you're just a human to me. And it's like, that's not real. That's not the world that we live in. And, it's as good as rainbows and unicorns. So just had to explain the picture, brother.
Thank you. All right, so colorblind rhetoric ignores the systemic issues that exist within our country. These systems that were built by people who allowed for and at times were intentional about racism. The default to racism becomes the outcome. Okay, so because the system has racist foundation, because the system, and quite honestly, if you read the Constitution largely is colorblind until it gets to the 3/5 clause. And even the 3/5 clause, if you want to understand that a little bit more, actually worked a little bit better for slaves at the time than we actually give it credit for, because the alternative is slaves would have been considered full people, and therefore Southern states would have had higher populations. And even though the slaves would have been counted in the populations, they would not have been given any political voice. So basically you're talking about a state that is, let's just say there are a million Black people, right? And so instead of counting them as a million Black people, they get counted as, say, 600,000 people, okay? And so instead of there being a million votes behind slavery, there are now only 600,000 votes behind slavery. So it actually worked to mitigate
legislative value.
Right, it mitigated some of the racist impact that slave owning states had on the way laws were codified and passed. But the Constitution reads, all men are created equal, right? There's no reference to there being a white hierarchy, okay? So that colorblindness typically hides something, and that what it hides generally is racism, because racism is built into the foundation. So if things are continuing to go as they're designed and they have a racist design, then you don't have to call a system racist to have racist outcomes. And that's why colorblindness works against equity and what it is that we're trying to accomplish, because it ignores the inequities that currently exist.
Yeah, and just think about that conundrum, or that cognitive dissonance, right? That the reality that by counting Black people as 3/5 of a human, we actually provided them a greater chance at human rights in the United States of America. Like, just let that sink in. That's the depth of which these systems or these outcomes are woven within our system. And I don't know, do we have the car on the next slide? Yeah. So there is no neutral when it comes to the fight against racism. And I use this analogy of wheel alignment in your car. With the American construct as it was intended to be, there were a few things that all people were supposed to have, right? We're supposed to all be created equal. We're supposed to all have the ability for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We have a system of checks and balances through our Congress, judicial, and executive branch. And we have the ability to earn wealth. And those are kind of the four wheels of the American ideal, the American dream. But what happened with this American dream is it ran straight up into a curb of racism. And while it was, all the wheels are still there, things can move down the road if you let it go on its own, just like with your car. If you've ever had a misaligned car, and like me as a poor college student, didn't have the money to take your car in to get it aligned, if you let the wheel go, it's going to naturally drift towards a direction. The same is true with our American culture, because the systems were laid and laced with racism. If we just let the system go, they steer towards racism. They bend in that direction because of what we allowed to go on in this country for hundreds of years. And until we actually do a full realignment in this country and truly address the issues, all of the stuff that we've been doing up until this point has been us just trying to hold the steering wheel a little bit in the opposite direction of where it's aligned to go on its own. And that idea, I think, helps some people understand the lasting impact of systemic racism in our country.
That's a good analogy, Jason. I think I like that one better than the rainbows and unicorns.
That's just because you have no soul.
my wife says that too. Y'all lying. Anyway, so Kendi talks about racism in three different ways. He talks about segregationist, assimilationist, and anti-racist. Okay, so in this dueling consciousness, he really compares segregationist versus assimilationist, and he talks about it both through a Black lens and a white lens. The segregationists, we're talking about there being a difference between what it means to be Black and what it means to be American. From the Black lens, we're talking about this clash, right? Where I want to be Black. I want to be proud of my Blackness. I want to embrace everything it means to be Black. Yet there's something about my Blackness that is not American. Okay, so I'm constantly weighing whether I want to be Black or whether or not I want to be American. And that's how you end up with this, this counterculture in Blackness, where we have to be unapologetically Black, because there has been little reconciliation between the Black identity and the American identity. Okay, and so that's what it means from the Black lens. But from the white lens, we're saying that Black people are less than human, like they could never be the same or equal, and therefore the best you can do is try and segregate yourself, right? This is kind of that that rhetoric that our president talks about when he talks about suburban housewives not fearing having people come into their neighborhoods because of low income housing, right? We're talking about segregationists, that the fact that if you have poor people living in your neighborhood, then you are less safe, you are there's going to be more crime, et cetera, right? And so the segregationist says there's a difference, we recognize the difference, and we can never be equal based on that difference. This compares to the assimilationist, where they say that Americanism is something to be inspired to, right? If you become civilized and you have these certain aspects or qualities of civilization, then you can be American, right? Or what we call white, okay? And so from a Black perspective, a lot of us want to be a part of that. A lot of us have died to be a part of that. Many of our ancestors have, their bodies have been left and abandoned out in fields in strange places, fighting to be American. And that clash of that inherent Blackness, where the segregationists are going to see you and say, you can never be white, is always going to cause that dual consciousness, right? Where from a white person's perspective, this is where you're talking about missionaries and stuff, where, you can be American, you just have to civilize yourself, right? Pick up your pants, clean up your language, use different things and artifacts that we consider civilized. And once you are civilized, then you're considered white, okay? Both of these are racist, because they force Black people to be in a position of having to give up themselves in order to be considered equal. There is the attribution of the qualitative and the quantitative value that is being linked to our identity, okay? And that in and of itself is the problem, no matter what the intentions are, okay? Obviously, when people are missionaries and they go and they're trying to help people, they're trying to civilize them, like they're doing it out of good intentions, but it's still racist, okay? So the goal is self-determination, to recognize that in every human being is a full person that is capable and able to exercise full agency. And the way that they exercise that full agency should not be disregarded or should not be downplayed for no reason or simply because of their race.
And let me add something. We just had something in the chat if you want to take a look at that, Thomas. But let me add to that. You'll notice Thomas kind of interchange the idea of being American and being white. And why that is a valid interchange is because, again, go back to the founding of the country. Who was in power and who was defining what it meant to be an all-American boy, the American dream? All of those were defined without consideration for what it may be in, what it may mean for somebody who came over in a different way or had been treated as a property for half of their life and then were given freedoms in the latter half of their life. And this idea of assimilationist, it's like even language that we use, like America is a melting pot. Well, you have a melting pot, everything goes in there and it all kind of becomes the same. But that is not the intention. The intention is not for all of us to divest ourselves of our cultural and ethnic and place of origin being or values and just give all that up to become whatever American is, what America really should be is beyond the melting pot. I don't know what a good cooking analogy is. I'll ask my wife. She was a culinary major. Where you bring all of the ingredients together. Maybe it's more of a salad, right? You bring all the ingredients together, but they maintain their own integrity, and there's a value of them together that could not exist on its own. So it's important that even when we think of what it means to be American, we recognize that traditionally has been defined outside of minority groups. It was defined traditionally by mostly white males who owned property. So that leaves a lot of us out.
Absolutely, absolutely. To go to Julianne's point, what does civilized mean? This goes back to the last series that we just had when we talked about moralizing and racializing space, right? Civilized is whatever the power structure defines it as. Okay. Initially, it was Christianity. All right. When the settlers first got here, if you were not Christian, you were a slave, right? And the thinking was, because you have not gotten the level of sophisticated thinking, you've not understood Christianity and therefore have not adopted it, right? And so being not Christian made you non-civilized. But as we needed to expand what it means to be non-civilized so that we can use people for labor, we expanded that definition to be savages, right? We included Native Americans as savages, as Africans were beasts, right? We animalize people to make them appear less than civilized, and then tell the body politic that we're not doing anything wrong to these people because they're not people. What we're actually doing is helping them better access their humanity by giving them chores, giving them labor and things to do. That way they actually create something that is valuable. And that ends up being what we call civilized, right? So anything could be civilized, right? Like eating out of the toilet could be considered civilized if that is what the power structure is doing. They just convince everybody else that if you're not eating out of the toilet, you're not civilized. And that way they're able to enslave those people and treat them as less as human. Exactly. Dehumanization, right? And the paradox of using Jesus as that mechanism. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Well, one thing, I'm going to throw this out real quick. I know this is a little aside, but about Christianity. Christianity was used to enslave Black people, but another thing that I'm starting to understand as I go through history, Christianity was also used to liberate Black people, right? It was the Christian thinking of slave that had them constantly rebelling, that had them constantly seeking liberation. And one thing we don't know about slavery is there were so many rebellions, okay, that it was an institution that was hard to maintain anyway, because people fought naturally for their freedom and their liberation. And Christianity had a lot to do with people having the faith to believe that they can do that. Corinna talks about the Black man that was used as an exhibit in the Bronx Zoo. Exactly, right? It all goes to dehumanization, to get people to feel less than or think less than of another group. And if you could get them to think less than, here's the real trick to racism, right? I can get white men to feel like they're the most powerful group in society without giving them a single thing. Okay, I just convince them that everybody else is inferior to them. And I've been able to keep all of my resources and have now made them feel that they're the most powerful group. They're not going to come after my resources because I've made them feel powerful, right? So we can keep this system going and perpetuate the system simply by letting people feel superior to other people, even though the system is giving no resources or nothing to that group to make them actually maintain any power, right? I'm still trying to unpackage why white men make up 70% of suicides, right? If you are at the top of the social ladder, how is it that they are killing themselves the most, right? We need to all unpackage this. And this is, I think, the call to action of anti-racism. I've already kind of gotten into this. Both systems of segregation and assimilation is racism, because you assign quantitative and qualitative values to a person's identity characteristics. That's not to say that, being anti child abuse or child molestation makes you racist. I want to make sure, I hate that I even have to go there, but I want to make sure that we're keeping those conversations separate. And so racial inequity, when we're dealing with racism, we're talking about getting rid of racial inequity, not inequality, inequity, right? And inequity exists when two or more racial groups are not standing on approximately equal footing. And equity exists when two or more racial groups are standing on relatively equal footing. Well, Black people and white people now are standing on relatively equal footing, right? You can't discriminate against Black people. There's the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause. Well, this graphic here illustrates what we mean by equal footing. Okay, so when you look to the right, all right, those two boxes that are stacked there, those are historical policies that white individuals were able to benefit from, right? And so those are there, whether we like them or not. Those are there. The question is, who gets to stand on those particular two boxes? When you look at the one box, we're looking at less aggressive policies, say toward Asians and Latinos. Not to say that they were not did not experience racism. They did on an astronomical level, right? But slavery and the deconstruction of their identity didn't happen to as far as an extent as it did African Americans and Black individuals. So who gets to stand on the one block, right? And then if you look throughout history, we've prided ourselves on land ownership and voting rights, okay? Historically, the United States government has given away land, has allowed for white families, white individuals, white entrepreneurs to get access to land and then use that land to build wealth and capital that lasted generations, right? So what group doesn't get a box right now, okay? And that is the way that we need to be thinking about racism in this particular context. And we're gonna go in a little bit more.
And let me just speak to that too for a second. And this is actually right in line with what I was going to say. When you look at the years of it's people want to say, well, everything's equal now. I've even had this conversation very recently, like, oh, are all of those policies still in place today? No, but how do you expect somebody who is coming from a 400-year head start to ever be caught up to by a group that has been beat down and held back for those entire 400 years? So, Thomas, I think you were going to go into more detail with that here.
Well, I mean, it's here. I didn't want to go into too much detail. I was going to move along, but
sure.
A racist policy is any measure that produces or sustains racial inequity between groups. Okay, Jim Crow, redlining are two examples, but this graphic here kind of shows you the historical identity of racial discrimination as it has existed in the U.S. The only remedy for racial discrimination is anti-racist discrimination. Okay, the only remedy for past discrimination is present discrimination. There is no such thing as, yeah, slavery sucked, Jim Crow sucked, segregation sucked, having our own apartheid sucked. Now, let's just get back to business as usual, except for we won't do those bad things, especially considering the 14th Amendment was passed during the Reconstruction era in the 1860s. It wasn't until 1965 that redlining was struck down by the Supreme Court, right? So we're talking about literally a century after the Equal Protection Clause was passed, where Black individuals are supposed to get the same rights and the same legal protections as white individuals. 100 years passed before that actually manifested itself in housing where redlining was struck down. But then even after that, we know that racism existed in land distribution and planning beyond that, right? So we're not talking about, let's just get back to equal, let's just forget about racism, let's just stop talking about race. Absolutely not. That is not the discussion. That is not where we are right now. we are talking about race, and we're going to continue to talk about race, because that's going to be the only way we can remedy what has been done historically on this issue.
Right. This goes back to the alignment of the car. You can't just all of the things that we've done in the past have been just holding the wheel in the other direction and trying to make it right. But we've never actually broken down the system and started it moving forward properly to begin with. So we need to balance these powers in order to, if we want to get to a place there, you know, people talk about this like, well, let's just live in this utopian place where we don't even discuss race. The only way we can ever get there is if we equalize the fields first. Just saying, hey, we removed all of these racist laws, which we know that that's not even true. In fact, more get passed on an almost yearly basis. But we've removed all of the overtly racist laws, so everything should be fine. That's not enough. You've got to go back and fix the damage that was done. It's putting a Band-Aid over a bullet wound.
Absolutely. And that's where anti-racism comes in. It's not enough to say that you're not racist, right? You need to be aggressively against racism. The opposite of racist is not racist. Okay, the opposite of racist is anti-racist. The difference is one either endorses the idea of racial hierarchy as a racist, or racial inequality as an anti-racist. And so that means also a rejection of colorblindness. The colorblind individual ostensibly willing to see race fails to see racism and falls into racist passivity. The language of colorblindness, like the language of not racist, is a mask to hide racism, okay? It is not enough to say you don't see race. You must see race if we're going to fix racism. But this is actually something I think gives everybody a little bit of room. And it also goes back to whether or not racist is a pejorative term versus a descriptive term. Okay, a person is not racist. The acts that they do are racist. Okay, we can be racist one minute and an anti-racist the next. What we say about race, what we do about race in each moment determines what, not who, we are. And I'm gonna give, I guess, a very personal anecdote really quick. I grew up playing football, and then I studied business, and then I studied law. All of these things are just straight cutthroat, tell it like it is. Okay, so if you're not picking up your legs in your football drills, you're lazy. If you're not going the extra mile to find that extra dollar for your shareholders, you're lazy. If you're not looking up that extra citation in your legal document, you're lazy. And I've been trained to think this way. The very first time I started teaching, I had somebody do something that I thought was completely inadequate. So I called them lazy, right? And never did it dawn on me the difference between attributing a label to a person's behavior rather than that person themselves, right? And so a lot of hurt comes from putting personal labels on people. Very little correction can happen after you've labeled somebody. When I call that student lazy, the chances of me being able to reach and inspire them at that point had diminished substantially. Okay, so we need to be thinking not necessarily about what the labels that we put on people, but the labels that we put on behavior. And that allows us to be in a better position for correction because we're not personally attacked. We can isolate ourselves from our behavior. We can say that was a mistake. That was a stupid act, right? But the minute I begin to feel that I am that thing, it becomes a lot harder for me to wear the responsibilities of fixing that thing. So we have to remember racism is not a person, it's an act. And that changes from act to act. You may commit a racist act in this particular moment, but then you might commit an anti-racist act in the very next moment. That doesn't make you neither racist nor anti-racist. It just makes you a person who is doing racist and anti-racist things. And so as we begin to unpackage, I guess, the first part of this book, one of the things that hit home to me was um, how racism actually functions. And he talks a lot about this in that we actually, and I guess the best way that I illustrate this is the way that I connect to it. And that is racism within the Black community, right? When I see a Black person who doesn't look white, i.e., they're sagging pants, they're wearing a do-rag, they have tattoos, they look unconventional. My thoughts are, we need to coach that person to make them better, right? We automatically go to that assimilationist type thinking. Okay, so I have some images here that I want us to go through and think about what we think about these images and why we think about them. Okay, obviously they're going to be different. You might have no react. Well, you should have a reaction. And then I want you to think about that reaction in light of whether or not you bring groups together, i.e. equity, or whether or not that stereotype or that feeling you get drives people further apart. Okay. Oh, Fred left. I'm sorry. Didn't get to say goodbye. All right, so this is the first image, okay? You see tatted guys, forget who they are. I know you guys probably know. I know who this is. I don't know who these other people are. But the tattoos, what type of images are you thinking? What type of stereotypes are you seeing or getting or feeling when you see people that are tatted this way? And not just tatted, because they have tattoos, but tatted in a way that celebrates their rejection of the conventional business setting, right? It's on their forearms, their necks, there's no covering these tattoos really. What are some thoughts that you're getting behind this? And when you're thinking about these people, are you seeing this person? Do you see the person on the left as a multimillionaire, right? He's a professional football player, right? But do you see him as a millionaire? Okay, do you see the person on the right as having the ability to create the next vaccine? Okay, can the coronavirus vaccine be created by someone who looks the way the person in the middle does, right? What are you thinking about these outward expressions? And then there's the nuns, right? What are you thinking about nuns? What are you thinking about religion? What is it about the way these people are presenting themselves that are giving you a feeling one way or the other, right? And there's a lot of feelings that can come from this depending on your reactions with the church, your histories with the church, where you're from, whether or not you've been exposed to missionaries or nuns, and the way of thinking or life, right? Is your thinking bringing groups together? Is it driving people apart? Protesters, right? This is a pride rally. Okay, what do you think about when you see homosexual individuals out in public participating in public displays of affection? Is that wrong? And is it wrong for heterosexuals to engage in public displays of affection? Why the double standard? Does that double standard bring groups closer together, or does it drive us further apart? What type of decision making have you already made about this woman wearing the cape? Could she be a teacher? Could she be a scientist? Is she a lawyer? Is she a judge that's going to be deciding your case Monday morning? This is one of my favorite ones, sagging pants. I actually am from LA and Victorville, where sagging was something people did. I never automatically assumed that a person who sagged their pants was a gangbanger. I also never assumed that a person who sagged their pants was gay, because apparently that's something that happens in prison. There's all these stories and stereotypes that exist as to why sagging takes place. Sometimes, and I can say this was true for me, I sagged my pants because my pants didn't fit. Okay,
Yep.
I wore hand-me-downs. I couldn't get the pants that I owned over my big voluptuous booty. Okay. And so I had to wear my pants below my booty because they literally couldn't fit over them. Okay. So what does that mean as far as when you see me in, you know, any places, what you're thinking about me, right? My wife, when she met me, she had some, I had these shorts that literally almost went down to my ankles. She called them shans, and she loved making fun of me for my shans. But they made me feel comfortable in who I was, right? So what are you thinking about this? If you see this person walking down the street, is this the type of person that is going to donate you $1? Is this the type of person that's going to rescue you from peril? Or is this the type of person that's going to jack you for your goods? Okay. And if you've made a decision about any one of those already, then you're a racist. Okay.
And Thomas,
Sure.
let me
Oh, you're
just,
not a racist. I'm sorry. Let me correct that. That perception is racist.
yeah, let me add into that, because same story. I don't know about the voluptuousness, but you know, I began sagging my pants in high school, and I remember having a big fight with my mom one day when she saw me. Well, it wasn't really a fight; it was my mom yelling at me, because that's how that relationship went. And she was like, "You need to pick up your pants, and why are you doing this?" And I said, "Mom, they don't fit anymore." And it's interesting how, you know, there are some things that begin as a necessity, and then they become a cultural norm, and then they become a cultural phenomenon. And I'm not saying that that's where sagging came from inherently, but that those realities happen all the time. I mean, you even look at like gold teeth, could have been an example just as well. That is a necessity for some people, that it's their dental work, right? And they chose to decorate the dental work a bit to enjoy the work that was being done. And now that has an association to it, to a certain type of person, or to a certain, and then it becomes a cultural phenomenon that now people are going out and getting grills and putting fake dental work over their real teeth.
Exactly. Exactly. Another example I like to throw out there is the do-rag, right? This happened to me when I was in court, where, you know, a guy walks into court wearing a do-rag, and the DA just lays into him, the no good piece of this, you know, how dare you wear that thing? That's such a stupid thing to wear. And then over the course of the morning, he looks at my wavy hair and then goes, "Hey, I like your hair." Bro, do you know how you get waves? That man is wearing right there is how I got my waves. I wear that same thing. I just can't wear it to court, right? So we have these value judgments that we make about people based on these artifacts, when in reality, they're not always true. Do bad people sag? Yeah. Do bad people not sag? Absolutely. Do good people sag? Yeah. Do good people not sag? Absolutely. So there is no value judgment that should be made by this one thing alone. But our assimilationist ways are going to tell us, because he is dressing unconventionally, he must be a gangbanger or something wrong.
Right? Looks like a duck, walks like a duck, must be a duck.
Now look at this. What are you thinking from this picture? Right? If this were a group of black guys that looked the exact same, what would you think? Right? When I look at this picture, I don't know where they are, but the size of the house, the size of the lot, I would presume that they're probably not in California. They probably are on a farm or ranch or something like that. These are some guys that are having a good time. They are friends. They don't look like brothers. You know, they're getting together and they're socializing, right? But then if they were all black and doing the same exact thing, you have the peace sign there, right? Would they look like a gangbanger? You see all of their underwear, right? They're all sagging. What type of feeling do we get from this picture? It just so happens when I see this picture and this picture, I don't see much of a difference, right? But society is going to tell us that there is a difference. What is that difference? I don't know. Okay, these people are at home, the other people are on the street. People are going to use that to justify their difference. But I don't think there should be a qualitative difference between these two photographs. Okay. Jason, something you want to add on this one?
No, I would have the same analysis, bunch of bros hanging out.
And so I put this here because at the end of the day, this is what racism is about, right? At least at this first part, this is where we're capping the end of this first session, right? Racism is about denying people access to who they are, whether it be a segregationist policy that puts them off and forces them to make do with whatever resources that are available in that particular area, or it's an assimilationist policy that says you can come and join us, but you must look, act, walk, and talk like us. The repercussions are the exact same. We're seeing a silencing of the human being, okay? And that in and of itself is the inherent harm of racism. That is why Brown versus Board of Education said separate but equal doesn't work. The simple fact that you have a separation is an indication of a false sense of superiority and a false sense of inferiority to the in and out group respectively. Okay, so there is no such thing as being not racist. At this point of the game, you've read the book, we've had this discussion, we are all working toward anti-racism. Get your hand off of her mouth. Let her speak. Let her represent herself. Do not force her into a system or a place where she does not want to be or does not belong. But then again, don't force her to look, sound, and walk and talk like you. Both of them are bad. Okay. And I know there's a lot of people that want to see change, right? They want to see things be different, but what change looks like to them is everybody else looking like me. And I don't say me as me, I mean me as them. And that's not okay. Okay, so recognizing that difference and what racism does that prevents us from expressing ourselves and fully recognizing and appreciating and accepting each other's differences is what this first session and takeaway should be. Something to add to this, Jason?
Yeah, just I would echo the same statements that at the end of the day, the goal is allowing all individuals that self-determination, that projection of their own voice into the world as it sits most comfortably with them, not having to assimilate it to make it comfortable for other people to receive, nor having to segregate themselves so that they can speak comfortably in one dimension of their life and code switch to assimilating in another section of their life. The reality is we all need to grow together and become comfortable with learning the different languages and mode of communication that people utilize so that we can truly allow a positive valuation of all cultures and all people. Again, it's not about neutrality, it's about truly giving real value to all people.
So one of the things that we're going to do, and we're wrapping this up, we're going to ask that you consider dress codes, right? What are some restrictions that you know to exist in various workplaces, and how have those been used to exclude people, right? How are they defined? What type of cultures and groups are automatically excluded because of the dress codes? Okay, a big issue that has been taking place really nationwide is hair, right? Whether or not people are allowed to wear braids. Okay, that is something, or dreads. That's something that we know has been put in place to target Black people. Okay, so dress codes, what type of dress codes are used? Are they Eurocentric? Are they patriarchal? Are they exclusionary? And if so, then they're racist. What stereotypes are you operating off of? And here's the thing that I want to talk about with stereotypes. They exist for a reason, right? The brain has shortcuts that are called heuristics that we use and we operate on for our best protection, right? The less information or less things that we have to process in times of trouble, the safer we are, because the quicker we'll be able to act, right? So stereotypes exist for a reason. What are the stereotypes that you have, and why do you have them though, right? Sometimes they're not based on any fact. They're not based on anything else except for your social conditioning. So you got to ask yourself, what stereotypes are you operating under when you see a Black man walking down the street and you run to lock your door? Okay. Are you locking your door because it's sitting open and you see an objective security issue? Or are you locking your door because that Black individual creates a subjective security issue? And if you are doing it because that person's identity and the way that they look, that means that they're racist, or you're being racist. That act is racist, right? So unpackage that. Why did you open the door? Why did you lock the door? I'm not telling you don't lock your door. I'll lock my door if a skinny white woman walks by. I don't care. All y'all crazy, okay? But the simple fact of the matter is those stereotypes is what leads people to feel isolated. They lead them to feel discriminated against, and we feel them. We know when you're looking at us and treating us a particular way for a particular reason. And that ultimately results in prejudice, right? What sort of prejudices have you engaged in? Okay, I've engaged in prejudices. We've all have. And to say that you haven't means that you're denying yourself opportunity to truly reflect on your betterment in this area. Okay, you have been prejudiced, and that's okay. We all have been. The question then becomes, what did you do about it? How did you assess it? And how did you reflect on it? Okay, and we have these examples that exist in our history. The better we can unpackage them and reflect on them now, the better we can protect our future against them. So I'm asking everybody to not only consider the different dress codes that exist in your schools and your workplaces, the various stereotypes that you have and how they cause you to act, but then I also want you to be honest with yourself and think about the groups that you've been prejudiced against and why that prejudice has existed and what it ultimately led to.
Yeah, and I want to add one layer of this is even evaluate some of the social games that have been played, little songs that we sing with kids, and books that we read to them, stories that we tell that encapsulate a group of people with an action in a certain way. I actually recall a personal interaction that I had about 3 years ago walking through my apartment complex. And I know a little bit of Spanish. I'm half Hispanic. My mom is from Central America. And I was walking through the complex, and a mother and her daughter, who I know they both speak English, but they both speak Spanish as well, and I've interacted with them. They start singing this song in Spanish, and then like the mom looks at me, starts singing this song in Spanish, and runs the other way, kind of laughing with her daughter. And I posted it on Facebook because I knew enough about the song, or I could interpret enough in the song that told me it was a song about Black people, and it specifically refers to Black people as purple people, and so you run away from the purple people. And I'm like, this woman who literally says hi to me every day because I pass by her apartment complex is teaching a racist song to her daughter and taking a racist action. And I even would give them the benefit of the doubt that that wasn't about me in that moment, because I'd literally interacted with them and like tossed the ball and all this different stuff. But you pass on these underlying thoughts to your children in our culture just by passing on some of these childhood games that we play as well.
Yeah, that's a very good example. So that's the material that we have for tonight. That wraps up session 1. Any thoughts, anything that's triggering anybody, or something that you want to add to what we've discussed here?
You know, while people are getting up bravery, I just want to clarify one thing. We put at the beginning of the slides, the Kamala Harris picture, is she Black? Yes. I don't know if we clearly answered that. Yes, she is Black.
Yeah, for people who don't know, slaves were taken to Jamaica just as they were America. Okay, so her father being of Jamaican descent makes him as black as me.
Yeah.
Okay. And her
And
mother, and that I actually did appreciate that. Thank you, Chase, for pointing that out. The Indian side of her, right?
yep.
That was I saw that last night. That was a beautiful part to see come out. But this goes to the question of blackness, right? It's always funny that we want to classify people as black, and then we want to deny them that classification when it means giving them privilege, right? So she's black, and if I see any of you calling her not black, I'm not going to say that's racist. I'm going to call you racist. I know, I'm breaking the rules, but whatever.
Yeah, and she's black, she's Indian, she's African American. Yeah, all of them. She gets all of them. And also, people want to claim, oh well, she's just claiming black now. She's on record in 2006 in an all black setting as we in the African American community. Like, this isn't new, and I am not campaigning for Kamala. From a political standpoint, I'm campaigning from her personhood, and this is the fight that I'll have. I don't care what what race you are, what nationality you are. If someone is trying to take away your personhood because it offends them, that's when I am willing to go to bat for you, and I will put all my strength and energy behind that, because that is just unacceptable in my book.
And here's the other thing to that. I know mixed black women who didn't grow up with their fathers and they don't consider themselves black, right? But that has never stopped society from treating them as black. I don't
Yep.
go based off of what people say that they are necessarily in these types of conversations. I go based off of what society has treated them as, right? And she's had to overcome a lot of the same issues as black people, whether she has called herself black or not. So that's why all of this is important. But really, it just goes back to those labels. Are you driving a wedge between people, or are you bringing us closer together? And that, to me, increases inequity between races rather than increasing equity.
Any other closing
Shit,
thoughts?
I'm gonna check out Trevor Noah on this, because this dude be killing it. Rhonda,
Yeah.
do you have anything you want to add?
I appreciate again everybody jumping on this and sharing thoughts and listening to this. I'm gonna have to grab that book, but as I'm sitting here listening, I'm thinking about how I grew up, and it has just come to my mind right now that I've been going through my whole life assimilating, and just knowing. There's a video also out there talking about code. So I'm one way at work, and then I'm another way at home, and I'm another way with my girlfriends, and I can switch it on and off when I need to. And that's just how I've grown up. And so more and more, as I get more comfortable and more people get comfortable with me, they get to see how I really act. But when I'm at work, or if I'm talking, or if I'm public speaking, or if I'm doing anything, I know how to switch it. So I'm just reflecting back on that, because that's just how I've grown up my whole life, is I've had to assimilate.
And Rhonda, isn't it amazing that you've never once had to think, turn the switch on, turn the switch off?
Nope, it's automatic.
It's automatic. It's a gauge of the room. And all Black people that I've talked to know this experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually think, Thomas, it's something we would be wise to unpack a bit next week, is what really we mean as code switching, and how that impacts the Black community as a whole.
Well, we'll get into it, because he talks about that in Systems of Power and stuff.
True.
So it's actually in the context of the reading. So yeah, we'll dive into it. Rhonda, hopefully you're back next week and you can help us further unpackage that. But quite honestly, that's one of my biggest issues with everything now, is I am way too qualified right now to having to be speaking your language, right? Or to be doing what it is you want me to do the way that you want me to do it, for no other reason than I just look different. right? So that's why I'm very motivated in this anti-racist movement.
Yep.
All right, so if there's nothing else, it's 7. We'll go ahead and say good night. Thank you guys for joining us for session 1. As I stated, this is a 4-part series. After this series, we are going to be taking a break, and then we'll be coming back with another series probably 3 or 4 weeks later. So we're going to stop the every week thing after this series and, you know, kind of be a series-based program from here on out. So thank you guys for joining us. Looking forward to next week and continuing the conversation. Good night. Love you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Night, everyone.